Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to New Wave Global. I'm Rabia Mehmood. New Wave is an independent news site which looks at the world through a South Asian lens and relies heavily on your feedback. Please do like, subscribe, comment, and engage with our work. Today, we are going to be quickly trying to understand what is happening in the Middle East at the moment. Now that Iran has struck back, it has struck back at Israel in retaliation of what all Israel has done in Lebanon and continues to do so. And in fact, also Gaza and Palestine. To speak more about this, we have with us Ejaz Haider, who's a senior writer and editor, is a columnist with the Friday Times, and he is also an expert on warfare and the matters of the world that we are trying to look into, and understands the region much better than most people. And Ejaz is also a resident fellow at Center for Security Strategy and Policy Research at the University of Lahore. Ejaz, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us on such short notice.
Thank you for a very generous introduction. One tries to figure out what's going on. As I was saying to you off camera, it's pretty difficult to extrapolate into the future from recent past events or the present, but let's give it a try.
Yes, I know, but we are going to be speaking to you as lay people and going to be asking you some very simple questions. Your answers can be complicated or as detailed as you want them to be. But of course, we want to access what's happening at the moment, specifically because for months, everyone has been, and like people like us and others who are interested in the region, they've been thinking, will Iran or won't Iran? And now Iran has gone ahead and struck back. And we've been looking at footage which is coming out of Israel. We've been looking at footage which is coming out of Gaza and elsewhere of people celebrating. So a lot of mixed emotion and reaction to what Iran has done. How do you see that, and why now?
Okay. So I think it's good to sort of start with what has happened recently and then sort of try and go back. See, the Iranian policy since the Iranian Revolution has been primarily the survival and sustenance of the regime. That's been one of the most important pillars. It's actually the central pillar of Iran's policy. And partly because, as if you recall, this wasn't, the theocratic forces weren't the only forces that ousted the Shah. There were lots of forces from the left and, moderates and centrists and all of that. But ultimately, the theocrats won. And then immediately after that, even as the regime was consolidating itself, Iraq invaded Iran, and you remember 10 years of war, meat grinding war, war of attrition. So this is kind of deep into the psyche of the regime, survival and sustenance. And then the other two priorities, I would say, one is to get the United States out of the Middle East. And that is also born of the adversarial paradigm in which Iran and the United States got locked after the Iranian Revolution. And the third has to do with the support for the Palestinian cause and by extension, to try and create an axis of resistance, or what the Iranians describe as the unity of arenas. Now, and if you recall, the Israelis have been constantly talking about the Iranians trying to create a ring of fire around Israel. So, but one of the most important things in the Iranian strategy, which is a strategy of the indirect approach, or you can also call it creating their own asymmetric advantage by not directly getting into a confrontation either with Israel or with the United States or with any US ally, which is why they have slowly and gradually created their influence across this region that we describe as the Greater Middle East. They've relied on Shia populations, but also, for instance, in the case of Hamas, which is a Sunni organization, supported them on the basis of their support for the Palestinian cause. So they have honed this into a fine art of running proxies, although I will qualify this term in a bit, running proxies over wide geographies. But when I say proxies, this does not mean, as is often the impression that's given by the Western press, that Iran snaps its fingers and, all of these, whether Houthis or Hamas or Hezbollah or the Iraqi militias, will stand to attention. No, they also have agency. A lot of the work that they do is also contextualized within the local context. Hezbollah, for instance, is not just a proxy, it is also the primary political and military force that Iran relies on for shooting trouble, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iraq. And, I don't want to go into the details because that will become very expansive. But the fact is, the point that I'm trying to make for your viewers is that Iran's primary strategy has been not to get into a direct confrontation because they have been building their strength brick by brick. Military strength, whether it's missilery, whether it's their movement towards acquiring some kind of nuclear capability, just short of weapons capability, whether it is about keeping their economy afloat despite sanctions, they have been very careful not to. But this time, and previously on April 13th, and I'll go further back after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, they attacked two US air bases in Iraq, but they were very careful. They choreographed it. They choreographed it by striking, by leaking the information that they were going to strike the bases, and then targeting those areas of the bases which did not have the US personnel. The idea behind that was to show to the United States that Iran will retaliate, but at the same time, to tell the United States that it does not want to expand the conflict. And on April 13th also, they did the same thing. If you recall, the United States was constantly saying that there is a 48-hour band in which Iran will attack Israel. That band, that information was deliberate. And Iran did attack within that band. So the United States, its assets, the allies, the Israelis with their four-tiered ground air defense system, Jordan, there was a huge air defense umbrella over Israel. And Iran wanted to, technically speaking, operationally speaking, they wanted to see how many of their missiles can actually get through that umbrella. What is the nature of that umbrella? Because they were also getting technical feedback from how their missiles will be intercepted. And so that was, again, a choreographed thing. This time, however, it wasn't choreographed in the sense that they have, from what I can see, obviously, I don't have inside information, but on the basis of, my knowledge of how this works, they're probably a mix of some older version IRBMs and some newer versions. The newer versions have what we call MRVs, maneuverable re-entry vehicles, which can evade the interceptor's kill vehicle. And so they use those. And the latest information is that the two air bases that they targeted, missiles did hit the air bases, although they might not have damaged the vital infrastructure at the air bases, but they did go through the umbrella and hit the targets. Now, just simply for your viewers, a ballistic missile basically is something that shoots up and goes outside the Earth's atmosphere. what we call exo-atmosphere. Then it travels, and that's the mid-course flight. And then exo-atmosphere, it re-enters, and therefore every ballistic missile has what we call a re-entry vehicle. And so once it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere and becomes endo-atmospheric, that is the time when it falls at very high speeds, often reaching up to 10 and 15 Mach. So once it re-enters, then it's a matter of seconds before it hits the target. This was just so, but the cruise missiles are always endo-atmosphere. They don't go into outside the Earth's atmosphere. They fly low. It's a different kind of missile. It's an air-breathing missile. So it's a different, but they did not use the cruise missiles this time.
So it was, would you say quickly, before we move on to the next question, that it was still a calibrated attack? Like it's not an escalation of the way it is being understood, right, by the rest of the world or people who are watching? It's not that kind of an escalation. They're still careful in their response. And also, like, can Iran afford to continue to do this?
No, there is definitely an escalatory potential of this move. And that was Iran's dilemma. If you read the transcript of what General Bakri said to Press TV after the attack, he said that our patience had run thin. So there was this conflicting sort of, or a dilemma, if you will. One part of which is not to get into a direct confrontation, and the other part of it being, how do you respond to something like this? Because if you do not respond, then the problem is that of losing face. The problem is that of losing the confidence of the axis of resistance, the other groups in the axis of resistance. So it was a very tough decision. And the Iranians finally decided to do this. But let me add a footnote here, because that's something that I have written about in the Friday Times. What the Israelis have been doing are essentially covert assassinations. Yes. Whether it is Ismail Haniya, whether it is Fuad Shukr, whether it's Saleh al-Aruri, whether it's Aqil, whether ultimately Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. What they do is that they have amazing intelligence capabilities, real-time intelligence capabilities, and then they use their aerial assets to take out the targets. So Iran, ideally, Iran should have gone for that option. But unfortunately, Iran and its and the other groups in the axis of resistance, they do not have that kind of capability. And therefore, they have to go for a sledgehammer as opposed to Israeli scalpel approach of taking out, or to sanitize this whole idea of killing as to neutralize the adversaries and take out the leaders and field commanders. The ideal would have been, for instance, to go for a high-value target in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv and take out, a top Israeli leader or, commander. That would have been the ideal thing. But that requires a different kind of capability, which right now Iran does not possess.
Yes, I watched your previous video explainer as well, which was based on your write-up for the Friday Times, and you kind of went into details of like the intelligence capacity of Israel versus what you're calling, or what people understand as axis of resistance in our part of the world. So that's there. So it's a matter of capacity as well. And we also know, like, Israel, of course, this war has been bankrolled by the US and, and the rest of the Western world, for the lack of a better term. And we saw, like, recently more defense, like, funding, approval of more defense funding from the US. Now, Netanyahu has said that Iran has made a major mistake. And we would say, oh, this is just war rhetoric, but like everything Israel has said, it has gone ahead and done it. every brutality, atrocity it has like inflicted upon people. And like you're saying that those were targeted assassinations that it carried out in Iran and Lebanon, but there has been like a massive toll. I don't want to say collateral damage, and that toll is increasing in Lebanon as well. People are getting displaced, and we are seeing the situation escalating as far as Lebanon is concerned, even though in south of Lebanon, on the ground, 8 Israeli soldiers have been killed, what the Israel has admitted, admitted its own casualties. How do you see that? Because it's really it's difficult to watch because we're watching it in high definition, right? Like this unfolding.
Yeah.
So the toll is massive, and the war seems to be escalating. It's been a year since Gaza. How do you see this?
Okay, so Israelis conduct two types of strikes.
Hmm.
One are precision strikes,
Hmm.
where you have real-time information on a particular target, and you use the kind of ammunition which is not going to be very destructive. It will hit the target very precisely.
Hmm.
So that's one kind of strike that they do. The other kind of strike that they do is the one that they conducted in the case of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah.
Hmm.
Because according to their information, this particular compound was the headquarters of the executive council of Hezbollah, and they had information on the presence of Hassan Nasrallah there. And apparently there was some underground construction also. So they went for a different kind of ammunition and targeting 6 blocks and flattening them. So it's a different kind of strike where they want more targets, regardless of collateral damage. Then there is a third kind of strike, which they've been doing in South Lebanon, where they have, according to them, where they have identified Hezbollah's launch pads or probably some hardened positions, and they have been bombing them. And of course, they've been using heavier bombs. The issue is that way back in 2006, when Gadi Eisenkot, who later became the chief of staff of the Israeli army and was also part of Netanyahu's war cabinet before he fell out with Netanyahu, Eisenkot was commanding the northern forces, and he introduced what has come to be known as the Dahiya doctrine. So Dahiya, as we know, is the area with almost 700,000 population, which is in the south of Beirut and is generally considered to be Hezbollah's stronghold. So in 2006, they applied this doctrine, and Israel has, for a long time, developed a very high tolerance threshold for collateral damage. Exactly the same kind of thing they did in Gaza, in different parts of Gaza. And here's how it goes. And it has been, investigated by superbly by Plus 972, Local Call, and certain other publications within Israel, including Haaretz, that if they have the information that there is one particular, I'm talking about Gaza, that there is one particular Hamas leader, let's say, who is embedded in a place where there are likely to be 100 civilians or 200 civilians or 300 civilians, Israel will go and conduct the strike. So in order to get that one person, if it results in the deaths and killings of 200, 300 civilians, including women and children, so be it. So this is what we are witnessing. And the Israeli argument is, as I'm sure you know, that, we take care, we throw leaflets, we call up people, we tell them to go from point A to point B, but there's nothing we can do because these guys are embedded in the civilian population. And even though we take good care of it, the fact is that collateral damage is inevitable.
Yeah,
That's the Israeli.
Yeah, I know, and long been debunked.
I know. I'm just simply giving
Yeah.
you that argument as they present it. I've just told you that the Dahiya doctrine is very clear. It is about a very high tolerance threshold for collateral damage. As a matter of fact, there is a subset of the Dahiya doctrine called the Hannibal Directive. And Hannibal Directive also came when, back in 2002, when some Hezbollah fighters, they ingressed into, northern occupied Palestine. I frankly, I can't really bring myself to call it Israeli territory because I don't consider Israel as a legitimate state, at all, regardless of what, the Zionists say. But so the Hezbollah fighters, they ingressed into the northern occupied Palestine and they kidnapped some captured and some Israeli occupation forces soldiers and took them into Lebanon. That was the time they came up with this Hannibal doctrine or directive, which says that the troops should open fire, even if it means that their own people will get killed. So the idea is that no one should be allowed to capture Israeli soldiers or civilians, and troops are at liberty to open fire, even if it ends up killing the Israelis. So essentially, what I'm saying is that there is this very high sort of acceptance of casualties. And for instance, look at how they killed their own, citizens.
And citizens on October 7 as well. They knowingly opened fire at their own people.
Absolutely. This was Haaretz was the first to identify this. The helicopter gunships that they sent, they started, strafing the ground regardless of who was where. And so lots of Israelis who got killed on October 7th got killed because of their own fire.
Okay, so we know that you have to go, and but last question. What does this mean for like the rest of the world, in a way that I know you do not want to look into the future and you don't want to speculate, but what about the US? Do you think the US is going to get more involved, other than the fact that it is, providing support to Israel in all ways possible, but directly? Is this going to turn into Iran versus US in any way?
That's a very good question. If I look at the trend lines right now and sort of expand from there into unknown territory, frankly, firstly, the United States is fully involved in this war, just like the United States is fully involved in the Russo-Ukraine, right? So the only difference that we are talking about, and which is what your question is, whether the Americans will come directly into the conflict, because they haven't come directly into the Ukraine conflict. They've been supporting Ukraine by all means possible. So the important issue about this strike is that Jake Sullivan, who's the national security advisor, the US national security advisor, did a presser saying that there are going to be severe consequences for Iran, and we will be part of that effort with Israel. Words to that effect. Now, contrast this with the April 13th strike, where Biden said that he had told Netanyahu that you have got to win, take it. In other words, that do not retaliate. This time, the United States is saying very clearly that Israel can retaliate, and we will, in fact, support Israel in that retaliation. Now, it remains to be seen what kind of support that would be. Now, my own sense is that they will not use their own assets or their own personnel. But what they can do is they can try to get the Israelis air bases, for instance, in India. India and the United States already have a formal agreement, mutual agreement for basing assets, for refueling and the rest of it. So that could be one possibility. The other possibility certainly would be that the US would pull out information, part of the Five Eyes, which doesn't include Israel, but that's the kind of information that can be passed on to the Israelis with reference to targets inside Iran. Israel, I'm assuming, given their intelligence capabilities, they already have a lot of that information. Then air refueling provisions for aerial assets. And so this is the kind of support that they will and they can give Israel. If they go further, then obviously they can use their own assets. And they have, aircraft carriers in the region. But I doubt that they will go for that kind of direct confrontation with Iran, because public rhetoric notwithstanding, given that it's like a month before the presidential elections in the United States, I don't think that they really want to get embroiled in this, because if they do get into this Middle East morass, then there are going to be other second and third order effects. For instance, Russia will get a freer hand in Ukraine, because obviously, no matter what you do, your focus is likely to shift. And then, of course, China will have a freer hand in South China Sea. And we are not talking about, it is not a snapshot view. I'm trying to take a longitudinal sort of trajectory on this, because this is a generational existential war. It's not a short, sharp conflict. It is something which has been attritional, which is likely to remain attritional, where the ideas of victory and defeat will be subjective. And it will be very difficult to put an objective view of what exactly is defeat. And I can give you an example. Way back in 1975, a US Lieutenant Colonel Larry Summer was meeting one of his Vietnamese counterparts, and Summer said to his Vietnamese counterpart, Colonel Tu, he said, we never lost a battle against you. And Colonel Tu responded by saying, that may be so, but that is also irrelevant. So the idea is that you can win lots of battles and yet lose the war. So we are, the real problem here is likely to be that if Israel retaliates, which I believe it will, it will try to dominate the escalation ladder, which means that it will go a couple of rungs higher to extract the consequences of the Iranian strike. If that happens, then Iran, depending on how much its capability has been degraded, it will depend on whether it wants to climb down on the escalation ladder or wants to climb further up on the escalation ladder. And if it chooses to climb further up on the escalation ladder, then we are getting into a spiral. And if the oil rigs, for instance, are destroyed, already the Brent price is going up, the stock market's coming down, the international commodity prices going up, it's going to become, it will have international consequences. And some countries like Russia are going to basically benefit from that, the Russian oil and gas. Many like us, since your program is essentially pegged on what is in the interest of Pakistan and the reverse. So it'll be a huge problem for us. I mean, given the state of our economy and given the fact that this government is trying to consolidate itself and has been very conscious of fuel prices, and has tried to sort of, cap them or bring them down occasionally, they'll just shoot up, because obviously we don't produce our own, oil and gas. But we'll not be the only ones getting impacted by that. There will be various other countries that will be impacted. So it's going to not just stay within the context of the Middle East. It's going to it's like you throw a stone in still water and the waves start from where the stone hits the water and then expand outwards. It's something like akin to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you have explained it in the terms of economy as well. And I've also been thinking of how it would be security-wise for the region, because considering we're right next to Iran, but that's a discussion for another episode. Thank you so much for explaining what's happened and what's unfolding at the moment in parts of Middle East. We'll be speaking to you again about this issue and more, and looking at exploring further angles. Thank you, Ejaz, and thank you to our viewers for watching. Khuda Hafiz.